Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. Kyle Bauer and the Real Ag crew bring you truthful, unbiased information about real agricultural concerns. From the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
Have you ever driven across the plains and noticed along the highway a red or golden crop and wondered what it was? What are its properties? Grain sorghum is our topic today on Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
Today we'll hear experts talk about sorghum and milo. The two terms are interchangeable.
Growing up around here, we grew milo. Milo is all I ever knew that it was until you start getting involved with the organizations. And sorghum, there's grain sorghum, there's forage sorghum, there's sweet sorghum, there's sorghum for biomass, but generally grain sorghum is what we're talking about. But milo is often what people understand it as.
Some of the people, they call sorghum as kefir. And if you go to different places like in India and China, sorghum can have all type of different names. So here in the US, basically, there are two main common names, sorghum or milo.
What are the properties of sorghum?
Well, there's grain sorghum, of course, and then there's forage sorghum, which is often grown for livestock feed. There's sweet sorghum in pockets where we're producing syrup and molasses, and there's interest in growing biomass sorghum for biofuels production.
We raise more sorghum in Kansas and Texas and just in the South in general because it likes heat and it likes warm nights, whereas corn, which would be kind of the comparable crop, does not like heat. I don't think it likes temperatures over 85, and it certainly doesn't like it when it's hot at night. And so it's a little more consistent yielding probably than corn has been in the past.
About 50% or 51% of the sorghum production is here in Kansas, and maybe the other 50 or less, 49% is in Texas. So if we just think about that, only two states probably have almost 100% of all sorghum production in the entire US. And the question is why we are seeing sorghum production more in these two states. And the answer to that is basically sorghum is a very efficient crop in utilizing water, nutrients, and it's very fitted to these conditions. And why? Well, here in these conditions, the rain is probably the main limiting factor. So if we can get a crop that can use water very efficiently, if we can get a crop that the seed cost is lower as compared with corn, if we can get a crop that we don't need to apply as much as fertilizer as we are applying to corn. So then, if we take a look and start to take a look to all these points in the production side, sorghum is fulfilling each of these individual points.
The Nebraska no-till bus trip was down here, and they said, why would you plant milo? Why not just plant corn? Because I had some corn. And they didn't realize that, for conventional wisdom in this area was that you can't raise corn unless you have irrigation or river bottom or good creek bottom where it can kind of hit the water table. And I don't think people in Nebraska realize just how much heat we can, or in other areas how much heat we get. And milo, that's one of the things I've noticed with no-till is where we have a lot of residue that helps, even though it's say 90 degrees outside, until you get that really hot blast furnace day, the milo really doesn't start to take off and grow. That's how much it likes heat.
People want to grow sorghum because it is particularly effective on lands where water is not as available. It is increasingly competitive with yields and with price with other crops, so it's a smart choice for them to consider.
Milo can use subsoil moisture and it likes heat. And so, I mean, that's why it has trouble moving north, say in Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, because the temperatures are too cool, and it won't yield. It won't shoot ahead. So that's why I think Milo is a good fit for these areas, is just because of our weather conditions.
The main harvestable component for the crop is the grain, and the grain for sorghum is present on the heads. So if we want to take a look to some of the phenology of the crop, so phenology means how the crop is evolving during the planting time till harvest. So we have something that we identify as a vegetative stage, and basically the crop is growing and we are producing more leaves and the crop is increasing in height.
Yeah, Milo looks a lot like corn probably for the first month. It's kind of a, I don't know, just green leafy plant, and then once it finally gets to the point where it's what they call blooming, it'll shoot ahead, and that head exerts itself up over the rest of the plant, and it's been bred to be uniform, so it's easy to harvest.
So one of the things that we need to identify in sorghum is that today we have sorghum crops that they are not really quite tall as the first probably wilderness species. The hybrid sorghum today is kind of very short. The main crop that we were seeing in Africa in 8,000 years ago, it was a very tall crop, and most of the times there were a few tillers. But we are saying that in the breeding process from these years, I mean from the last probably 1920 till today, what it was trying to do was trying to reduce the height and trying to produce a more stable crop, with the idea of trying to have lower height, more tillers, and trying to produce a really larger heads in each of the tillers. And that's kind of how sorghum in some way evolved from the main roots. So from a really tall plant to something that today is quite short. And then in some point we are seeing that the crops are starting to release some heads. So there is a terminal point and the heads, and we can identify that because of different colors.
The reason Milo is different colors is just genetics. There are some small differences, I think, where whites are supposed to be a little more drought tolerant. They usually don't yield as much, and the reds tend to yield more, but they struggle a little bit more for whatever reason in the heat.
And in the heads we have different grains, and each of the heads can really, bear like a different number of grains. And the grains can also change in different colors. We have from really brown colors, purple, red, yellow, white. We have different type, and all the different type of colors of the grains are also referring to different genotypes. When I'm saying the word genotypes, mean that they have different architecture. So that means that the crop maybe have different leaf angle, or they have maybe different number of tillers, or they have maybe different response to the same environment. So some ones are more prone to produce tillers, and some other ones under drought maybe they just reduce the number of tillers and they produce just small heads. So the grains and the harvested part of the crop is present on the heads, and that's where all the grains are being located.
And we go in and we just cut the heads off so that we don't have to take a lot of the plant. And the head is full of a lot of small little berries that when you cut them off, they go through the combine and it breaks the berries loose from any other part of the plant that may be connected to it and separates it out.
And the tillers are basically another vegetative structure. So imagine this situation. We have a plant that we already have one unique stem and all the different leaves coming from the same plant. So the tillers are a different branch, a different section of the plant that is coming from one growing point and is producing exactly replicating the main stem. So basically we have stems and we have different number of leaves in different tillers. So the idea of having a crop with a main stem and with all the different tillers is that at the end what we are getting different number of heads. So for one unique seed, we are getting sometimes multiple heads. And that's one of the features that when we are looking to sorghum production, that's one of the things that we are always looking. We are looking to the number of heads per unit area. And also we are taking a look to the number of grains per heads. And finally, another component for yield is basically taking a look to the seed size. And seed size and seed weight is a kind of the ultimate component that will be defined very close to the end of the season for sorghum.
Yeah, I think part of the reason Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas have grown a lot of wheat is we get a lot of heat in the summer and we don't get a lot of rain, or can go, in the late summer or fall, and can go long periods of time without moisture. So by raising wheat, that gets planted in the fall, it's cool, you tend to get a lot of rain in the spring when the wheat is making its yield, and so that's why initially it's been popular. And I think the reason Milo fits well in those areas is because we do get heat, we do get long dry periods.
Sorghum is a very efficient crop, but sorghum yield potential is maybe the main limitation. And when we compare sorghum and corn in an environment with really high rain, really solar radiation, all the optimal nutrient level can produce maybe about 250 and 300 bushels per acre. So it's a very high yielding crop. Sorghum, with a very similar environment, it can get close to maybe 200 bushels per acre. So when you are taking a look to the yield potential for these two different crops, we are seeing that in terms of yield potential, sorghum is still probably is more fitted to medium to poor environments.
Yeah, sorghum acres across the country has been challenging until recent years, where we've started to see an uptick. We're now at around 7 million acres across the United States, and the crop is good, and we think we'll continue to see that to go up. But that is the focus of the industry, is to try to expand acres.
We plant sorghum because it adds diversity to the rotation. It's planted at different times than some of the other crops, so it spreads our workload out, and then it can, it's a little bit more drought tolerant, and it actually likes heat where a lot of crops don't like heat.
The production costs and the inputs associated with sorghum and the need for water is less, a third less. So if a producer is looking at their bottom line, which they always are, and they do the math on this acreage, and they see that sorghum will work, they'll grow it. It's a matter of education to make sure producers understand where sorghum has come over the years to be more competitive with a crop like corn.
What are sorghum's origins and history?
Sorghum is basically coming from Africa. That's the main continent for sorghum. And we need to go back probably 8,000 years ago to try to, trace back and go to the roots. Sorghum was originally from South Egypt, and basically there was a specific location south of Egypt, and it was probably taken from there, and it was domesticated. And some of the places that was domesticated first was in Ethiopia and then Sudan. It seems that in some point sorghum was moved from Africa to India, and from India and from that origin was spread out over all Asia. So how sorghum was coming from Africa to America was basically, I think, between the probably 19th and 18th centuries, when we have slave traders, probably starting in the east side of the US, and it was first really used for feed animal to almost like an 1870s. And from that time, sorghum was trying to introduce in the east area, and then from there was moving west.
Our understanding here in the US is that Ben Franklin referenced it in the 1700s around using it to make brooms. But it is a major cereal food crop around the world. And that's part of what is attractive about the genetic pool for sorghum is how long it's been utilized and how many pockets of it exist around the world.
What is sorghum used for?
So we can probably think about uses, and I would probably try to group them in 4 different types. The first one is probably about more feed. So almost 50% or really big proportion of the sorghum production is going just to human consumption.
one of the reasons you do that is wheat has gluten, some people can't tolerate gluten, and so Milo doesn't have gluten.
And so it's starting to replace different wheat components in the diets. So that's why sorghum in human consumption is a big player from now into the future. So one of the second aspects is also related to the feed. Feed for animals. Okay, sorghum is another really critical component here in the U.S. and in different countries in the world in trying to really substitute corn or another type of crops in getting more carbohydrates for the animals, and also some starch and sugar. And then another third component can be, as we talked before, for biofuels. So, that's another thing that is really becoming and is growing, and we are seeing more future for biofuels.
Once we were able to get EPA and to allow a pathway for advanced biofuels and allow sorghum to participate in that, that perked up some interest in seeing, can you get other types of sorghum to be utilized in that process because of just the need for feedstock, and knowing that, as you know, in Kansas, a lot of it is coming from sorghum into the ethanol production process. It's good demand for the industry, but I think a lot of it is just the availability of starch for the plants, and if sorghum can generally equalize and come out with the distillers that's suitable, why not use more of it?
And then our fourth component is something that we are seeing in different crops, that is basically, we can call other uses. So we can use sorghum for wallboard, we can use sorghum for biodegradable plastics, so we can use sorghum for all the different type of uses, and I think that we are seeing that from now till the future, sorghum will probably fit in different type of products, and it will become a critical crop. For feeding not only the population and for food, and also for biofuel, which is probably the future in the next coming years.
Let's take a moment to talk about crop rotation and where sorghum fits into it.
The reason we do crop rotation is because by planting different crops, it naturally breaks weed cycles, insect cycles, and so it will reduce your inputs because you don't have to protect yourself near as much against weeds, disease, insects. It also spreads your workload out. So a typical rotation around here would be wheat, then we rotate to milo, and then we rotate to say soybeans. A typical rotation in this area is once we harvest the wheat, then we'll harvest the wheat in June in this area. We'll have to keep the field clean until the following June when we plant the milo. And sometime in between when we harvest the wheat and when we plant the milo, we'll apply fertilizer, and then we'll also apply what's called a pre-emergent herbicide, which is just a herbicide we go and spray on before the milo is planted, and it has a residual effect that will continue to control weeds even after the milo's up without harming the milo. And then the milo will grow June, July, August, September, October, and then we'll harvest the milo in November. After we harvest the milo in November, we will plant beans in the following May. When you grow continuous wheat, you fight cheat, bindweed, rye, all those things, and so by rotating into sorghum, it'll help control those things, so it'll actually improve your wheat yields probably, or at least make your wheat enterprise more profitable, and make more money also by growing milo.
Why is sorghum now making more of a splash than ever? The answer comes down to research dollars.
In the last decade, the financial investment and the attractiveness of corn has allowed an explosion of acres there. Sorghum in recent years, because of drought conditions, farmers are looking at that as a viable alternative, particularly in western parts of these states in the Corn Belt. And so we've seen an uptick in sorghum acres because of that.
We need to also say that corn in the last 100 years, seed companies, private sector, public sector was investing so much funding and resources in improving this crop, that also we are seeing today that the genetic rate gain per year was really high in the last probably 40-50 years. Give me just one example. Corn was going from a 1960 in Kansas, we will say probably from about 70 bushels per acre corn average yield, and today we can say that we can go very close probably to about 200 bushels per acre in a really good scenarios. The same situation for sorghum. We went from a 1960s from maybe about 20 to 30 bushels per acre, and today we are about maybe 80. So we are seeing that the improvement rate of two different crops is really good. So we are seeing improvement from the last decades. But the main thing is that we invested too much resources for corn, and that's why we are seeing that corn has a really high yield potential for really rich environments. It's a crop that they can capture all the potential for rich environments. Sorghum is a really very good feed crop for really poor to maybe low resource environments.
My understanding, is there's probably less research dollars allocated to milo just because there's not as many acres. Corn tends to yield more. Corn can yield 300 bushel or more, whereas milo, you're doing pretty good to hit 200. And so it's just, for whatever reasons, it's been a more popular crop, and so more research, more dollars have been put into it.
What is the future of sorghum?
Well, future for sorghum I think that is great. We are seeing that the future for sorghum will be tightly connected to how will be the progress in the biofuel production. Because biofuel, as we mentioned before, is that biofuel we already try with the perennial crops. We try also with corn. So I think that sorghum is coming right now as a kind of a major role play in this biofuel production. And sorghum has all the capabilities and the plant structure in order to play and to be an active role in this biofuel production. So in the next coming years, I'm seeing that sorghum can play an active role and can produce, for example, more crops in areas that corn or a different crop is not fitted. And still we are seeing that in different countries, in developing countries around the world, sorghum is still a major staple food. So we don't need to forget about that. So sorghum is a crop that we can fit for all the different environments, and can go from a very rich environment and it can go to a really poor environment, and still we can produce. And that's an ability that we don't have in so many other crops. Well, if you take a look to the sorghum picture around the globe, we have maybe three big players. And the main three big players that we can identify, one is the US, which is the main big player. In terms of export capability, US is one of the biggest one. So the second big player is Argentina, which also between US and Argentina, they almost sum up about 30% of all export capability for the world. And then another third big player is also Australia. So it's very interesting to see that the global food security and food itself is not really a question that is today only for one specific country, but it's also something that we need to start to talk about more globally.
Sorghum is a crop where we're trying to help people understand that it's a smart choice for biofuels, for exports, and with its drought profile and the ability to grow it, as long as we can improve varieties and get some herbicide resistant technologies on the market, we should be able to increase those acres.
Yeah, I think in the future sorghum will continue to have its place and possibly increase, because places that have been continuous wheat will grow more sorghum just because it economically tends to be a more profitable crop.
There you have it. Hopefully tonight's show shines a light on this resilient but often overlooked crop. On behalf of the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, and this has been Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
The Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.